Belaya River sector, Soviet front, January 1942. At minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, German soldiers of the 218th Infantry Division reported hearing human screams beneath the frozen earth, screams that came after they ate their missing comrades. From the depths of my collection, the War Maestro brings you a tale where starvation turns men into vessels for ancient horrors that don't just consume flesh, they consume souls. Operation Barbarossa had been Hitler's greatest gamble, an all-out invasion of the Soviet Union that began in June 1941. By that winter, the tide had turned. Fierce Russian counteroffensives, combined with the most brutal winter in decades, left thousands of German soldiers isolated and dying in the vast frozen wilderness of the Eastern Front. Among them was the once proud 218th Infantry Division, now reduced to scattered, starving remnants. Otto Banner hunched over a pathetic fire in the cooking pit, his once plump face now gaunt with hunger. The battalion cook scraped the bottom of his last pot, producing a thin gruel that would barely feed the 26 surviving men of their platoon. The thermometer had cracked at minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit 2 nights ago. Men slept in pairs now, sharing body heat like animals. "Any meat left, Banner?" Lieutenant Morgan asked, his aristocratic face drawn tight against the cold. The officer maintained his uniform to regulation despite their isolation, as if proper dress might ward off the madness of their situation. Banner shook his head, his butcher's hands trembling. "Nothing, sir." "The last horse was 3 days ago," he replied, eyes downcast. Something had changed in the cook since they'd entered this forgotten forest. The men had noticed how he whispered to himself while preparing their meals, how his knife skills had become ritualistic, precise in a way that made the other soldiers uneasy. Lieutenant Morgan surveyed their perimeter. Beyond their foxholes lay a village, abandoned and partially burned. The locals had fled or died before the Germans arrived, leaving behind empty houses with strange symbols carved above doorways. Old Russia, peasant superstitions. He'd ordered the men to avoid the place after Private Weber disappeared while searching for supplies. "We'll send out another foraging party at first light," Morgan announced, his breath crystallizing in the frigid air. Surely there must be something living in these woods. Banner looked up, eyes reflecting the dying firelight. "Living things hide deep in winter, sir, but I can find them," he said quietly. "I worked for a butcher in Dresden before the war. I know how to track, how to process what we find." That night, the temperature plunged further. 3 men died in their sleep, their bodies discovered frozen solid by morning watch. Lieutenant Morgan ordered their possessions distributed among the survivors. Banner volunteered to handle the bodies. No one questioned where he took them. No one wanted to know. By evening, Banner had returned to camp with a pot of surprisingly rich stew that he claimed came from trapped rabbits. The men ate gratefully, desperation overwhelming any questions about the meat's origin. Only Private Schultz, on sentry duty that night, saw Banner returning to the abandoned village, carrying a canvas sack that dripped dark fluid onto the pristine snow. And only Schultz heard the strange rhythmic knocking that came from beneath the frozen ground afterward, like something trying to dig its way up from below. Dawn broke reluctantly over the Belaya River region, casting weak gray light across a landscape rendered alien by snow and desperation. The men of the 218th Infantry Division watched as Lieutenant Morgan assembled a small foraging party. Private Schultz had fallen ill overnight, his skin feverish despite the cold, mumbling incoherently about knocking beneath the earth. 4 volunteers, Morgan announced. "We need food, ammunition, anything useful." His voice carried the brittle edge of a man maintaining order through sheer will. "Banner, your hunting skills are needed. Lead them to where you found those rabbits yesterday." The cook nodded, his eyes downcast. Something about his demeanor had changed overnight. He stood straighter, moved with greater surety despite the cold that left other men shivering uncontrollably. "Yes, sir. I know where to look. The foraging party trudged through knee-deep snow toward the abandoned village. Military doctrine dictated they maintain spacing to avoid presenting a group target for snipers, but the men clustered together instinctively, seeking warmth and proximity. Only Banner walked slightly apart, leading them past blackened cottages with that strange, deliberate gait. "Where exactly did you find those rabbits, Banner?" asked Corporal Mueller, struggling to keep pace. "Not rabbits exactly," Banner replied, his voice oddly flat. "Something better, something that keeps the cold away." The village center opened before them, a small, circular clearing, dominated by a burned church. Its wooden dome had collapsed inward, but its stone foundation remained intact. Snow had drifted against its eastern wall, creating an angled ramp to what had once been a basement entrance. "This way," Banner said, descending the snowdrift into darkness. The four men followed with reluctant obedience. Military discipline overrode their instinctual aversion to the burned structure. A cloying metallic smell grew stronger as they descended rough stone steps. One soldier lit a field lantern, revealing a root cellar that had survived the fire. "My God," whispered Mueller. The walls were marked with crude symbols, hooks, spirals, and what appeared to be butchering diagrams. A stone altar occupied the center of the room. Atop it sat a collection of knives, cleavers, and hooks arranged in a circular pattern. Hung from ceiling beams were desiccated animal remains, rabbits, foxes, and what might have been a wolf, all splayed open with mathematical precision. Their entrails had been removed and arranged in patterns on the dirt floor. "Banner, what is this place?" Lieutenant Morgan demanded, his hand moving to his sidearm. The cook stood before the altar, his breath forming red-tinged clouds in the frigid air. The locals called it the Shrine of Myasnik, the Butcher in their dialect. He explained calmly, running his fingers along a cleaver's edge. "A pagan god from before the Christians came. They made offerings here during winter's worst days. Meat for meat, blood for warmth." "This is blasphemy," Morgan said, but his voice lacked conviction. The cellar was noticeably warmer than the world above. "No, sir," Banner replied, turning to face them with eyes that seemed to reflect firelight, though no flames burned nearby. "It's survival. I've been making offerings. Small ones. The rabbits, the squirrels." He paused. "The bodies of our fallen comrades." The men tensed, hands moving to weapons. "And it's working," Banner continued. "Haven't you noticed? Those who ate the stew last night didn't shiver in their sleep. The butcher provides warmth in exchange for proper offerings." As if summoned by his words, a low rhythmic knocking began beneath their feet, the sound of something massive, moving through frozen earth, approaching from below. The knocking beneath their feet intensified, then abruptly ceased. Lieutenant Morgan ordered an immediate retreat from the village. The soldiers marched back to their encampment in silence, each man digesting what they had witnessed in the cellar shrine. Banner walked at the rear, cradling a burlap sack containing several of the rusted butchering implements he had taken from the altar. That night, temperatures plummeted further. Radio communications remained dead, and ammunition supplies dwindled to less than 10 rounds per man. 3 more soldiers succumbed to the cold before midnight, their bodies contorted in final, desperate attempts to generate warmth. "We have no choice," Banner said, standing before Lieutenant Morgan outside the command tent. "They are already dead. Their meat can save the living." Morgan's face was a mask of revulsion and indecision. Military discipline was eroding under the relentless assault of cold and hunger. "What you suggest is against every regulation, every moral law." "Regulations won't keep us alive," Banner replied, his voice carrying a strange, persuasive quality. The cook's skin had taken on an unhealthy sheen despite the frost that rhymed other men's beards. "I can prepare them properly, with respect, with ritual." The lieutenant remained silent, neither approving nor forbidding. Banner took this as permission. Working alone in a separate tent, Banner processed the frozen bodies with mechanical efficiency. His knife work had become even more precise, each cut performed with reverence. He collected blood in a tin mess bowl, arranging scraps of skin and organ meat in patterns identical to those in the cellar shrine. All the while, he whispered in a language he had never learned. The stew that night was rich and fatty. No man asked about its contents. They ate with animalistic fervor, scraping their bowls clean and licking their fingers. Within an hour, a strange transformation took place. Their shivering ceased. Color returned to blue-tinged fingers and lips. For the first time in weeks, the soldiers of the 218th felt warm. But the warmth came with disturbing side effects. Men reported vivid dreams of moving through frozen earth, of hunting prey beneath winter snow. Private Schultz, still feverish, swore he could hear the thoughts of his fellow soldiers rustling like dry leaves inside his skull. Corporal Mueller woke screaming that something was inside his chest, clawing to get out. At dawn, the sentries reported movement in the tree line, fleeting shadows darting between snowdrifts. Lieutenant Morgan organized a patrol to investigate, suspecting Soviet scouts. What they found instead was a dead wolf, splayed open from throat to groin with surgical precision, its entrails arranged in a circular pattern around its corpse. "This wasn't done by an animal," one soldier muttered, making the sign of the cross. "No," Lieutenant Morgan agreed, studying the precise knife work. "This was done by a butcher." They returned to find Banner standing motionless outside camp, staring at the abandoned village. The cook's posture was unnaturally rigid, his breath emerging as steam tinged with red. At his feet lay a fresh blood trail, leading from the supply tent where they had stored their dead. "It isn't enough," Banner said without turning. "The dead meat sustains, but the butcher demands fresher offerings now. Living sacrifices." His voice had developed a wet, rattling quality, as if he spoke through fluid-filled lungs. He is so hungry after sleeping so long beneath the frozen ground. When Banner finally turned to face them, his eyes had changed. They reflected no light at all, appearing as twin pools of congealed blood. "Soon," he whispered, "we will all be warm forever." Lieutenant Morgan's military training had prepared him for many scenarios: encirclement, retreat, even surrender under proper protocols. Nothing had prepared him for this. The officer sat alone in his command tent, reviewing field reports by lantern light. Outside, his men huddled in groups, whispering to each other while casting suspicious glances at the cooking area where Banner worked. The thermometer showed -50 degrees Fahrenheit, yet none of his men shivered anymore. Their breath still steamed in the air, but with an unnatural reddish tint. Most disturbing were their eyes, bloodshot and dilated, regardless of light conditions. Medical protocols dictated evacuation for such symptoms, but evacuation was impossible. Private Schultz crawled into the command tent without announcing himself, a breach of military discipline that would normally warrant punishment. Morgan hardly recognized the man. His face gaunt, skin pulled tight over his skull, eyes bulging with fear. "Sir," Schultz whispered, glancing nervously at the tent flap. "I saw Banner last night. He's changing." "Explain," Morgan demanded, fighting to maintain his officer's detachment. "He's sewing something onto himself, pieces of the dead men, sir." Under his uniform, I saw him binding Private Weber's face to his chest with wire from radio equipment. Morgan forced himself to think rationally. "Delirium from cold exposure, Private. Your mind is playing tricks." "No, sir," Schultz insisted, rolling up his sleeve to reveal his forearm. Carved into the flesh were crude symbols matching those from the village shrine. "We're all changing. The meat is inside us now. It whispers things, makes us want to prepare ourselves." Before Morgan could respond, a scream tore through the night. Both men rushed outside to find Corporal Mueller suspended upside down between two birch trees, his throat sliced with surgical precision. Blood poured down his face onto the snow, forming intricate patterns that steamed in the frigid air. Around the corpse stood 5 soldiers, their expressions blank as they watched the blood flow. "What is the meaning of this?" Morgan shouted, drawing his service pistol. The men turned in unison, moving with mechanical precision. "The offering must be properly prepared," one said in a voice that seemed to emerge from deep within his chest. "The butcher requires proper technique." At the center of the circle stood Banner, his uniform bulging oddly at chest and shoulders. He held a cleaver from the shrine, the blade dark with fresh blood. "The cold is our enemy, Lieutenant," he explained calmly while slicing into Mueller's abdomen. "The butcher protects those who serve him properly. Look at these men. None show frostbite. None suffer hunger pangs." The cook's fingers plunged into the abdominal cavity with practiced ease, extracting a length of intestine which he began arranging in a spiral pattern on the snow. "We found old military records in the village. The Russians faced a similar winter here in 1812. They survived by making offerings to the butcher. Napoleon's forces refused and froze. Military history teaches us to adapt to local conditions, doesn't it, Lieutenant?" Morgan raised his pistol. "Step away from that man immediately. This is a direct order." Banner smiled, his lips splitting at the corners to reveal far too many teeth. "Military hierarchy no longer applies, Lieutenant. There is only the butcher now, and those who serve him. Those who don't," he gestured at Mueller's corpse, "become sustenance." The 5 soldiers moved toward Morgan with unnerving coordination. From beneath their uniforms came wet, sliding sounds, as if something moved between cloth and skin. Schultz fled toward the forest, stumbling through deep snow. Morgan fired twice, hitting one soldier in the chest. The man staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he opened his jacket to reveal a grotesque patchwork of human skin stitched directly onto his torso, faces and hands bound together with wire and twine. The bullet holes leaked dark fluid but seemed to cause no pain. "You see," Banner said, stepping forward. "The butcher's protection." He pulled aside his own collar to reveal Weber's face grafted to his chest, eyes blinking independently. "We can all be warm. We can all survive. Just one more offering tonight, you." Behind him, rising from the snow where Mueller's blood had soaked into the earth, something massive began to dig its way to the surface. Lieutenant Morgan fled through the frozen forest, lungs burning with each desperate breath. The thermometer had shown minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit back at camp, yet sweat poured down his face. Behind him, rhythmic crunching of snow indicated pursuit. His menno, not his men anymore, were hunting him with the relentless precision of predators. Military training told him to find high ground, establish a defensible position, but against what? Soviet infantry followed protocols, operated with predictable tactics. These things that had once been his soldiers operated with something beyond human logic. In his flight, Morgan stumbled upon Private Schultz, curled beneath a fallen pine. The private's eyes widened with recognition and terror. "Sir," Schultz whispered, his voice cracking. "They're everywhere. I saw them digging up the snow, finding old bodies, Russian soldiers, locals. They're adding parts to themselves." Morgan nodded grimly. "We need to reach Soviet lines. Report what's happening." The words sounded hollow even to him. What would he report? That an ancient pagan butcher god had possessed his men? That they were wearing the skin of their comrades like uniforms? "There's more, sir," Schultz continued, trembling. "I found Banner's field journal. He's been documenting everything." The private withdrew a leather-bound book from inside his coat, pages stained with what looked like dried blood. Morgan flipped through the journal with shaking hands. The first entries were standard military documentation: supply counts, ration distributions, location coordinates. But as the days progressed, The writing changed, becoming more ritualistic, filled with strange symbols, matching those from the village shrine. The final pages contain detailed anatomical drawings of the human body, with annotations about which parts were most sacred to the butcher. Banner had meticulously recorded how each offering should be prepared, which organs arranged in what patterns, which blood drained in what direction. The last entry chilled Morgan's soul. 218th Field Journal, January 14th, 1942. The butcher walks among us now. The offerings have awakened him from his winter sleep beneath the frozen ground. He requires a vessel of perfect construction, parts selected from many bodies, assembled with proper technique. I have begun construction of this vessel using components from Weber, Mueller, and others who proved worthy. Soon, the butcher will fully manifest. Those who have consumed the sacred meat will become his hands throughout this forest. We will never be cold again. A diagram followed, showing a human form cobbled together from various pieces, with Banner's own body as the foundation. Organs had been replaced, limbs removed and reattached, faces grafted to the torso in a grotesque constellation. We need to destroy the shrine, Morgan decided, his officer's mind desperately seeking tactical solutions to a supernatural threat. If that's where this started. A wet, gurgling sound interrupted him. Schultz's eyes widened as a hook-shaped blade erupted from his chest. Behind him stood a figure that had once been a soldier in the 218th. The creature pulled the hook sideways, opening Schultz's ribcage with surgical precision. Steam rose from the exposed organs as they met the frigid air. The lieutenant must be processed properly, the thing said in a voice like meat sliding across a butcher's block. The butcher demands precision. Morgan fired his remaining bullets into the creature, which staggered but didn't fall. More figures emerged from the darkness between trees, moving with unnatural coordination. Each had been modified, limbs elongated with additional bones, torsos broadened with extra ribs, faces, and hands stitched across their bodies like decorations. And behind them walked something larger, something that had never been human at all. A massive form made of stitched hides and assembled body parts, steam rising from its patchwork skin as if the cold had no effect. In one hand it carried a massive cleaver, in the other a collection of rusted hooks. It breathed with the sound of a dying ox, each exhalation visible as a cloud of blood-red vapor. When it spoke, the words seemed to emanate not from a mouth, but from the entire obscene assemblage. "Little soldier," it wheezed, "your meat will make us strong, your bones will keep us warm." Morgan turned to run, but the snow beneath his feet suddenly gave way, plunging him into a pit. He landed hard on something that cracked beneath his weight. Bones, hundreds of them, arranged in circular patterns. He had fallen into a mass grave, one that predated this war by centuries. Above him, Banner's face appeared at the edge of the pit, no longer recognizable as the timid cook. His skull had been partially flayed, skin pulled back to expose the gleaming bone beneath. When he smiled, his lips split to the ears. "The butcher has chosen you, Lieutenant," Banner announced. "Your skin will be his new coat." Lieutenant Morgan clawed desperately at the frozen walls of the pit, fingernails splintering and tearing against ancient bones and compacted earth. Military survival training had taught him to remain calm, to assess resources, to formulate strategies. But all rational thought dissolved as the butcher's acolytes gathered around the edge of the pit, their modified bodies silhouetted against the weak winter sun. "Your fear seasons the meat," Banner called down, his voice no longer his own. "The butcher appreciates proper preparation." Morgan felt something shift beneath him, bones, sliding against bones, arranging themselves into new patterns. The entire pit was an ossuary, a repository of offerings stretching back centuries. His hand closed around something solid, the barrel of a rifle protruding from the mass. A Soviet Mosin Nagant, still clutched by the desiccated hand of its owner, a previous victim, perhaps from an earlier war. With frantic determination, Morgan excavated the weapon. The bolt was frozen solid, but the attached bayonet remained sharp. A weapon, at least. The lieutenant clung to this small victory, to the military practicality of having something with which to fight. Above, Banner issued orders with the precision of a field commander. Prepare the ritual space. Bring the hooks from the shrine. The lieutenant's processing must follow proper protocol. Morgan heard the creatures disperse, giving him precious minutes alone. He examined the walls of his prison again, this time with tactical assessment rather than panic. Near the bottom, partially obscured by stacked femurs and tibias, a dark opening suggested a tunnel, perhaps an animal burrow, or an older excavation. It offered the only possibility of escape. Crawling on his belly, Morgan forced himself into the narrow passage. The air grew thick with the smell of old blood and decomposition. The tunnel twisted downward, then sharply up, following no logical direction. Periodically, it widened into chambers filled with more bonesaw arranged in the same circular patterns he had seen in the shrine. Soviet Command. This is Lieutenant Karl Morgan, 218th Infantry Division. He whispered into his dead radio, clinging to military protocol like a drowning man to driftwood. Requesting immediate evacuation. Unknown hostile entity has compromised my unit. Repeat. Unknown hostile. The tunnel terminated suddenly, opening into what had once been a root cellar beneath another abandoned cottage. Weak daylight filtered through boards above. Morgan pushed upward with desperate strength, splintering ancient wood and emerging into the ruins of a kitchen. Snow had drifted through collapsed sections of the roof, but the structure offered momentary shelter. A military map lay spread across a table, weighted down with rocks. Not German issue, this was Russian, showing troop movements from months earlier. Red circles marked villages along the Belaya River, with Cyrillic notations beside each. Morgan recognized enough Russian to understand one repeated phrase: offerings insufficient. Movement outside drew his attention. Through a cracked window, he saw his transformed soldiers dragging something heavy toward the village Centera cast iron tub, large enough to hold a man. They positioned it beneath a wooden frame from which dangled a series of hooks. Banner directed the operation with meticulous attention to detail, consulting a weathered book that Morgan hadn't seen before. This was his chance. While they prepared, he could escape, make his way to Soviet lines, report what he had seen. Military duty demanded it. Morgan crept from the cottage, staying low and using snowdrifts for cover. His officers' training and evasion techniques guided his movements. 300 meters to the tree line, 200, 100. A howl split the air, not human, not animal, but something that existed in the terrible space between. The sound triggered an instinctual response in Morgan's brain, stopping him in his tracks. He couldn't move, couldn't think. Primitive fear overrode decades of military discipline. The snow before him erupted as something tunneled upward from below. A massive form composed of stitched-together human parts emerged, steam billowing from its makeshift joints. The butcher stood before him, its cleaver raised high. The meat always runs. It wheezed through a mouth assembled from multiple faces. The meat always returns to the knife. Morgan raised the bayonet in trembling hands. 218th Infantry Division surrenders to no one, he declared, falling back on the only certainty he had left military protocol. The butcher's laugh was the sound of flesh being stripped from bone. There is no surrender in winter, it said. Only survival or sacrifice. From behind, Morgan felt hands grasp his shoulders. Banner and the others had circled around while the butcher distracted him. Standard military flanking maneuver, executed with inhuman precision. "You will make us warm," Banner whispered against his ear, breath hot and smelling of raw meat. "The butcher has chosen you as his new voice." As they dragged him back toward the prepared tub, Morgan saw something approaching from the east, a line of figures moving across the snow. For one delirious moment, he believed it was rescue, perhaps a Soviet patrol responding to their absence of radio communication. Then the figures drew closer, and hope died. They wore ragged Russian uniforms, but their bodies had been modified just like his men. More of the butcher's acolytes, from another time, another war, preserved by whatever unholy power kept the cold at bay. Neva River Outpost, Leningrad Front, March 1943. Sergeant Ivan Shapkin huddled in his wool greatcoat, reviewing the prisoner transfer documents. Intelligence Division had ordered this particular German captive transported directly to NKVD headquarters in Moscow, bypassing standard interrogation protocols. Something about the prisoner had unsettled even the battle-hardened Russian soldiers who captured him. "He doesn't shiver," the corporal on guard duty commented, exhaling white clouds in the minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit air. 3 days in the holding cell without heat. Any normal man would have frozen. Shapkin grunted acknowledgement. After 2 years on the Eastern Front, little surprised him. He had seen men eat boot leather to survive, had witnessed soldiers continue fighting with intestines spilling from abdominal wounds. War created its own species of horror. "Prisoner speaks Russian," the corporal continued. "Not just phrases. Perfect Russian. Says things that make no sense. About a butcher god beneath the snow." Shapkin's pen paused over the transfer document. What unit was he with? 218th Infantry Division. They were reported missing near the Belaya River sector last winter. This one identified himself as Otto Banner, battalion cook. Something cold that had nothing to do with the temperature slid down Shapkin's spine. His grandfather had been from a village near the Belaya. As a child, Shapkin had heard the old man's stories about Myasnik, the ancient butcher who walked in winter, who offered warmth in exchange for flesh. "I want to question him," Shapkin decided, setting aside standard procedure. Some instinct, honed by years of survival in Russia's harshest environments, warned him that Moscow might be too late. The holding cell stank of raw meat despite being empty save for the prisoner. Banner sat perfectly still on a metal bench, wearing only a thin undershirt despite the freezing temperature. His skin had an unhealthy sheen, like partially rendered fat. "You are far from the Belaya," Shapkin said in Russian, studying the prisoner's unnaturally calm face. Banner smiled, lips cracking at the corners. "The butcher goes where winter calls him, Sergeant Shapkin, where men huddle against the cold, desperate enough to make proper offerings." The use of his name, which he had not provided, unsettled Shapkin. He moved closer, professional curiosity overcoming instinctual revulsion. "What happened to your unit, cook?" "They became vessels," Banner replied, his voice wet and thick. "Sacred meat properly processed." He leaned forward, and his undershirt shifted, revealing something underneath stitched patches of skin forming words in an ancient script across his chest. "The last one the lieutenanti fought so beautifully," Banner continued, eyes gleaming. The butcher chose his voice, his hands. "See?" The prisoner raised his right hand, and Shapkin noticed for the first time that it didn't match the left. The skin tone was slightly different, the fingers longer, not Banner's original hand. "We are all the butcher now," the prisoner whispered. "We will never be cold again." A sound came from beneath the cell floor, the familiar rhythm that had haunted Shapkin's childhood nightmares after his grandfather's stories. Knocking, something moving through frozen earth. Shapkin stepped back, fumbling for his sidearm, but Banner moved with blinding speed. His mismatched hands closed around the sergeant's throat with inhuman strength. "The front line is so close," Banner hissed, breath smelling of spoiled meat as the skin of his face began to split along invisible seams. So many soldiers, Russian and German, huddled in trenches, desperate for warmth, perfect vessels waiting to be processed. As consciousness faded, Shapkin saw the prisoner's chest split open like a cabinet, revealing a hollowed space inside filled with hooks and blades. From this obscene butcher's kit, tendrils of glistening meat reached for him, seeking entry points. "He made me warm," Banner whispered in perfect Russian. "He will make you warm too." If this tale from the War Maestro's archive left you feeling a chill that no fire can warm, consider joining our ranks of listeners. Check your breath in the cold air. Does it have a reddish tint? Then, subscribe to uncover more classified military horror that history tried to bury. Activate the notification bell. You'll want to know when the next forgotten file is exhumed from my collection. Share this account with those who understand that the most terrifying monsters wear military uniforms and follow proper protocols. Remember, in the darkest winters of war, not all who vanish are claimed by the enemy.